Welcome back, Sandads. Let's talk about the marksman's second ability, the Hard Light Stinger. Hard Light, how do you do? Fire a burst of hard light bullets all at once, dealing heavy damage. Has a shorter fall-off distance than other hard light projectiles. Never outgunned. Each hard light bullet deals more damage the less ammo you have in your current weapon. Remember that one. Deals the most damage when you have an empty clip in your current weapon. No loopholes. Damage passive is disabled when holding the rocket launcher. So, the Hard Light Stinger at a first glance seems relatively similar to the marksman's other melee abilities, firing bullets out of a conduit energy gun. But it actually has some pretty interesting quirks. So, the Stinger gives you 3 max charges, with a cooldown of 8 seconds per charge. It fires a closely packed shotgun burst of 3 bullets per charge, each of which deal 40 damage to the body and 50 to the face. But, and this is a big but, this damage exponentially increases as the bullets in your magazine decrease. So if you're missing, for example, 25% of your bullets, you get 10 extra damage. If you're missing 75%, you get about 60 extra damage. And on a completely empty mag, your damage is boosted to 150 for a body shot and 170 for a headshot. More than triple damage? That's pretty huge. This max damage triggers either when you finish the mag on a weapon and need to reload, or just when you run out of ammo and can't reload anymore. I'd say it's definitely worth to try and go for that extra damage from a completely empty mag, rather than the smaller bonuses of a partial mag. Honestly, the headshot damage isn't that significant either compared to the body shots, so if you can get a headshot, I'd say go for it, but otherwise it might be safer just to go for body shots. The damage does also fall off over range, but honestly I wouldn't say it's too bad. From my testing, it seems that if you're more than about 12 meters away, which, mind you, is somewhat far, usually when testing this, you're going to be right up in your opponent's face, but if you're more than 12 meters away, you're going to be doing 30 damage on a normal body shot instead of 40, 40 damage on a normal headshot instead of 50, 100 damage on an empty mag body shot instead of 150, and 110 on an empty mag headshot instead of 170. If my math is correct, which would be a bit of a miracle if it is, so take it with a grain of salt. But if it's correct, that's on average about a 32% decrease in damage if you're at range, which is fairly significant, but it's still pretty usable. The damage doesn't fall off any further after that, but if you go about 30 meters or further away from your target, your bullets will disappear before they reach the target. There's a hard cutoff there, so you'll be dealing a grand total of 0 damage. Realistically, you're typically gonna be pretty close to opponents when using this ability, and the spread on the shots isn't too bad at range either, until you start going that 12 plus meters away from the target. So I wouldn't sweat about using them at range, just don't try to snipe with them. Also, again, be careful about using melee abilities too close to an enemy, as you might just end up doing a regular melee. But moving on, the ability can be fired in quick succession, meaning if you see one Sandad on the battlefield who stole your lunch and called you a loser, let's call him Todd. If you see Todd on the battlefield, you can feel welcome to walk up to him and spam your stinger 3 times to make his insides become his outsides. A triple stinger shot with an empty magazine, even if you're just hitting body shots, will do 1350 damage. That is a lot. I mean, hell, 1000 damage is enough to kill anything in the game, even a fully healthed, fully armored, fully overshielded water juggernaut in their superdome. And you have 350 damage left over after that. Honestly, you'll be able to kill almost anything with 2 charged shots if you're hitting all 6 projectiles on the body. So how should you use the Stinger? Depends on your playstyle. It is a pretty good finisher if you're in a fight and your opponent is at low health, but personally, I think its true potential comes from when you get that extra damage from an empty mag. The extra damage can be nice if you're in a fight, run out of ammo in the mag, and use your stinger to finish off the opponent with the extra damage, but I find it a little clunky having to rely on an empty mag to be able to use my stinger to its true potential. So my recommendation would be to intentionally empty the mag of your primary or secondary weapon. Unfortunately, the rocket launcher doesn't count, as mentioned in the description. No loopholes. But if you expend all the ammo in your secondary weapon, you can just run around with your secondary in hand and use your stinger on those you deem worthy of killing. Or, alternatively, you can empty the mag on your primary gun, and although it does have infinite ammo, you can just sprint to prevent it from reloading. If it accidentally does start to do the reload animation, you can just switch to your secondary and then right back to your primary to cancel it. This is a little clunkier than using your secondary weapon, but it will allow you to keep your more powerful secondary ammo in stock for use in other situations, or when your stinger is recharging. One final tip is that if you find it hard to aim with the stinger, you can aim down sights with one of your weapons, and then press the key for firing the stinger. Doing this will allow you to aim more accurately, and the stinger fires just the same as if you weren't aiming with a gun while using it. Finally, it's the Juggernaut's turn. Didn't think I'd leave him out, did you? Now, the Juggernaut is a bittersweet story, because he got one really awful skill. And one really fun and also very good skill. So let's go through it. First we have Cannon Bash. Bonk. Use your cannons to smash enemies in front of you, dealing damage and knockback. You gain temporary armor when you use this skill, which you then keep if you hit an enemy. I love that the description says bonk. That's my favorite thing about this ability, but it's also the only good thing about it. I'm sad to say it, but Cannon Bash is not a very good ability. Sure, bashing someone in the head with two huge futuristic cannons sounds great in theory, but you gotta be able to hit them. And even if you do, you're more likely to give them a mild concussion than a lethal blow. But enough of my ranting, let's go over the ability for real. My main issue with it is the time it takes to charge up. From when you press the ability button to when the cannons do damage in front of you takes, I don't know, almost a full second? That doesn't sound like a lot, but trust me, in combat, a second matters. Especially with a melee ability like this. Thing is that in the second between you activating the ability and the ability triggering, the opponent usually manages to move out of the way even if they're not trying. Project Xandata is a high movement game, and the opponent is likely to either be out of reach or just in a different location where you haven't managed to turn and aim at them once the ability triggers. The ability has a 25-second cooldown, and now, luckily, the ability does do the full damage that a regular melee would do, 250, which is more than a lot of other melee abilities. It does have further range than a regular melee though, with a regular melee being able to hit 3 meters away, and the Cannon Bash being able to hit 5 meters away. It is also AoE, so you can hit enemies in a certain area in front of you, and you can potentially hit multiple enemies as well. It also locks on to nearby enemies, similar to a melee, which actually surprised me because it's hard to notice in game. Well, it more so pulls you over to a nearby target, but it doesn't lock your camera onto them like a normal melee does. And I know I'm comparing it a lot to a regular melee, but just stick with me because it also has about the same knockback as a regular Juggernaut melee does. I actually got a pretty fun knockback kill with this ability a few days ago, which is the only good time I've had with it. Finally, the Cannon Bash has one more little quirk. A quirk which I personally think is the only real reason to use the Cannon Bash over a normal melee. So this quirk is that you get armor when using it, and you get to keep it if you hit someone with it. AKA, you get armor in the brief 1 second charge up period. Okay, actually looking at it, it's maybe more like a 0.5, 0.75 second charge up, and not a full second, but You get armor during that short period, and if you hit someone, that armor becomes like regular permanent armor that won't go away until you get shot a bunch. So how much armor are we speaking? Well, as much as you want. The ability charges your armor bar to full, no matter your current level of armor. I gotta say that's actually pretty powerful, but again, it does require that you can hit the ability on your opponent in combat. So, how should you use this ability? In my opinion, you shouldn't. At least not until it's buffed at least a little. But if you do use it, it's fairly simple. Just use it as a regular melee. Preferably try and see if you can charge up the ability just before getting close to an enemy, so the 0.5 second delay finishes just as you reach them. Also, try to avoid using it if you're against a mobile opponent who's jumping around above you, teleporting around, wind sealing around, you know, all that jazz. Personally though, I prefer using it to banish Xenox to the fog of the Forsaken whenever he lags out. I could see this ability getting changed, so stay tuned. Alright, Xandats, I saved the best for last, Minifrags. Pop rocks. Fire a small grenade that can bounce off walls and surfaces. Deals minor damage and knockback upon hitting an enemy or after a short fuse time. Jumping juggernauts can be used as a movement option to grenade jump. It's still a grenade, deals minor self-damage if the thrower is within range of the explosion. So Minifrags are a fun one, simply due to their spammability, range, and knockback. Minifrags are utility skill with 4 charges and an 8-second cooldown. They deal 150 damage on a direct hit, with damage falling off the further the opponent is from the center. Typically, it's not too hard to get direct hits though, and they can be launched pretty far. I actually had trouble testing how far, simply because the training course wasn't big enough. But I'd say you can easily shoot at about 70 meters on flat ground, if you have the right arc on it, and that's without counting its subsequent bounces. Oh yes, it bounces. It usually will bounce a couple times on flat ground, but really there's no technical limit. The projectile lasts for a couple seconds after you fire it, after which it will explode. It will also explode when impacting an enemy directly, or even when impacting an ally. The enemy part of that is very useful, because the hitbox for the frags is actually fairly big, so it's not too hard to get direct hits on enemies, and the ally part can potentially be useful too. You won't affect your allies by firing a minifrag on them, but you can turn your allies into a bounce pad by jumping on top of them and firing a frag at them. Of course, you can also do the more traditional method of rocket jumping, or in this case grenade jumping, by just throwing a well-timed nade and using it to boost yourself up. If you're really good, you can also chain grenades together. I mean, you have 4 of them. Doing that consistently is above my skill level though. But I'd love to see it if any of you guys get good with it. I did also find an interesting type of rocket jumping with these things. It seems that in addition to riding the explosion of the grenades, you can ride the grenades themselves. This is actually pretty simple to do and can give you a decent advantage. The trick is just that you gotta stand still while doing it and then fire it directly into the ground. For a little extra height, you can fire another nade at the apex of the grenade ride, in which case the second grenade will hit the first one and they will both detonate, boosting you up. This does do a fair bit of damage though, about 150, so be careful. I've been able to do this very consistently, but one of my friends said they weren't able to do it at all, so let me know how it goes for you guys. Like all Juggernaut utility skills, you are fully able to use your weapons while firing a mini-frag grenade. And you can also use other skills while the launcher for the mini-frag is still down, even though it looks a little silly at times. Firing abilities and weapons at the same time is a luxury that most other abilities and classes can't afford, but personally I don't do it a lot because it's a lot to control at once and it throws off your aim. Especially when you try to combo something like minifrags, which have an arc to them, and a regular weapon which fires straight. It can get a little hard getting your trajectories to line up when firing both at once. Still, it can be good, especially if you're at close range, so I'd experiment with it on your own. Another interesting quirk of the grenades is that they can detonate each other. If you throw two grenades next to each other, when the first one detonates, they will both explode. This seems to be quite forgiving as well, as it seems you can throw a grenade in a corner, have it detonate, and up to like a couple seconds later, throw another one, which will instantly detonate from what I'm assuming to be the explosion of the first nade. This can actually be pretty useful for detonating grenades in the face of enemies, but it can also get really in your way sometimes. It's just an important mechanic to keep in mind. At least for now, this is something I feel may potentially be changed too. Also, pardon me for being unsure on the next couple features, but Minifrags are still a small mystery in the game. I'm unsure if other explosives are able to detonate them as well, but let me know what you guys find. From preliminary impressions, I would say no, but maybe that's something to explore in a future video. Do note that the Minifrags will do self-damage to you if you get caught in the explosion, although it is less than the full 150 damage. How much damage, you ask? Honestly, I'm not completely sure, but it seems to be around 75 damage on a direct hit, which is half the amount it does to enemies, and more of a nuisance than a threat. Of course, if you are constantly nading yourself, either by being too close to the enemy when firing, or by trying to nade jump, it will start to add up and hurt you. Sometimes the Minifrags will also instantly detonate on certain surfaces. I'm not really sure why this happens, so I don't know what to tell you. The nades can also be used to intercept incoming weaponry. I'm not exactly sure what abilities can be shot down, but I do know that you can shoot down Juggernaut Defender Mines, Solar Claymores, and other Minifrags mid-air. So what's the best way to use these beauties? Well, I'm glad you asked, because there's a lot of ways to use them. You can use them offensively in a fight to do damage and boop your enemy around. It actually boops your enemy quite a lot if you continually hit the frags on them, and it can really confuse and or annoy them. If you ever play against Dart Killers, you are obligated to use Minifrags, because he hates those things like they're the demon spawn of hell itself. Just kidding, we wouldn't want to bully Dart. But other ways to use them involve panicking, just throwing them all around when you feel endangered, preferably in a small room or corridor where they will bounce around and hit everything and anything. You can also use them for covering your path as you escape, since they will act as little mines on the ground, lasting 2 seconds and booping away anyone stepping on them or stepping near them after the 2 seconds are up. You can use them to cut off escape paths for enemies. You can lob them behind cover to poke at an enemy's health or to stop them from regenerating health. You can juggle your opponent if you're good at hitting the frags, and then finish them off when they've given up on ever touching the ground again. They also combo quite nicely with the Water Juggernaut's Trident, and they can be great for pushing enemies off the map or even to hold down an area by pushing and damaging enemies entering the zone. There's a lot of possibilities, and I look forward to seeing what the community does with these frags. Also, before we end off, I just want to bring up a gun. Yes, Mom, I know this is an ability video, but it's relevant, okay? What? No, I can't take the dog out right now. I'm doing a video. Fine, I'll do it in a couple of minutes. Just let me finish. God, Mom. Okay, so as I was saying, I want to talk about the Askell SMG. This SMG can have some quite nice synergy with any of the melee or utility abilities because of these two perks: Brawl Power and Tactical Takedown. Basically, what the perks do is that they will buff the Askell when your utility or melee skill is on cooldown, which can be useful if you use your abilities as soon as they're up, or especially with a lot of utility skills or the marksman's melee skills, which have multiple charges. Because even if you have 3 out of 4 charges, your ability is still on cooldown and you get that buff. And further, damaging enemies with the SMG will lower the cooldown of your melee or utility skill, letting you use it sooner. Personally, I think this combos pretty well with the Minifrags or the Hardlight Stinger, but it can be used for any melee or utility ability. The Ascal also dumps its ammo pretty fast, which is an advantage if you're using the Stinger. But that will be everything for this video. I hope you enjoyed, and it did take me a ton of time to test the abilities and make this video, so I'd greatly appreciate if you consider clicking that pretty red subscribe button below and leaving a rating. I'll see you out on the field of battle, Xandats.